Today we're going to talk about the grid. Hi guys, this is John Judd. So this particular concept is highly subjective and does depend on the music that you're making. Some of the grooves you have could afford a little looseness in terms of where they're aligned or not aligned to the grid. So this is going to be super subtle. I think it's something that'll help your music. I heard somebody put out a lo-fi beat the other day. You could just hear that everything was on the grid. It didn't groove as well as it could have had it been off the grid a little bit. We have a kick, a snare, a hi-hat, and piano. These are all native. I think those are all Mode Audio kick, snare, and hi-hats, and the close grand is native to FL Studio. So keep in mind, this is going to be super subtle. You're going to have to really listen for the nuances of how being off the grid is going to pull against the main beat. I come from a jazz background, and it's almost always things that pull against the beat that have a deeper groove than things that are aligned right on the grid. I know it's super tempting to put everything you have right on the grid. I get it. And I've done it before, but a lot of times you end up with a beat that is a little bit sterile. And if you put things off of the grid in a consistent place, if they're off the grid, but in weirdly inconsistent places, then it just won't groove. If you have a particular element that is consistently off the grid in the same exact spot, it'll pull against the groove in a good way or create a pocket for you that is better than something that is just right on the grid. So here's what we have. Everything right now is right on the grid. I'm going to preface this by saying none of this is actually mixed. This is just for the purposes of delivering the concept. Everything here is super tight and right on the grid. So let's say we wanted to move the snare a little bit. Now, if you're wondering what I did, I put these things a little bit off of the grid. Go find my snare notes. If you look super close, look at that, they're off the grid. Whereas the other one was right on the grid, the previous one. So here's with the snare a little bit late. I actually kind of like that. Had I layered the snares or something and made a thwack out of it, it would probably sound that much cooler. We're going to move that back and move the hi-hats a little. If you look at them, the hi-hats are being moved. The hi-hat is just a little late. Here was the hi-hat back to being on grid. So now the hi-hat is pretty far off the grid. Versus right on the grid. Off the grid. That sounds good. I kind of like it off the grid. It's pulling a little bit against the beat. Now, the piano is right on the grid at the moment. And if you're wondering what right on the grid means, everything is aligned perfectly. Here's on the grid again. Here's a little late. It's pulling a good bit. This is way off the grid for the piano. I kind of like that. And it's really pulling against the beat. If I were doing that, I might even pull the hi-hats a little closer to the grid. So that's turning into a really lazy beat, which I kind of like the sound of. It really depends on the genre of music you're writing. This last beat, if you're wondering, where are we? We don't want the kick to be late. The snare is on the grid. So let's say we move that snare just a little bit later. So the snare was a little bit late. I kind of like that. I might spend a little bit more time trying to suss out what that groove is going to feel like. The snare is a little bit off the grid. The hi-hat was a little off the grid. The piano was way off the grid. That's way off the grid. Look at that. Those are 16th notes, so it's almost half a 16th note off the grid. So let's go back, and we're going to do the original beat versus the one I came up with. Here's the original. Here's the lazy beat. I'm going to pick a really odd real world reference. If you've ever seen the movie, it's a Matthew McConaughey movie. It's actually not a bad movie. It's called Lincoln Lawyer. That movie has a track in it by a guy named Big Hollis, and I think it's somebody else too. The title of the track is Lincoln Lawyer. For some reason, I love that track. It's just really good. Happens to be a hip hop track. The piano, it's definitely off the grid, and if you listen closely, it just pulls against that main beat. That particular beat has a great feel. Go find it somewhere where you can stream it or go watch the movie. It's not a bad movie. So I hope that helps. If you're writing anything that's hip hop or urban or even lo-fi, if you're always on the grid, get off the grid. It might open up some of your grooves a little bit. I wouldn't recommend moving the kick, the snare, be careful with it, but you can pull the hi-hats and melodic elements a little bit late and it'll generally result in something cool in terms of pocket. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.